Now, at part two of this second lecture about 300, which is called A Hard Man is Good to Find. And once more, we find ourselves in a text where women come in a variety of types. Those who are sexually alluring and provide men with temptations, quote unquote, and these are the true spoils of war. I mean, this is the problem always with the way that men look at war, which is that um, at the end of the battle, there's some kind of um, men have this belief that they have earned the right to sexual spoils. So there's a payoff. There's a real payoff, not just in terms of what you did for your country and getting honor and all of that kind of thing, presumably getting some kind of respect from your fellow country people and so on, but also that women now owe you one, and that they can be taken as sexual prizes. This is very, very common, and in the North American worldview, it's deeply common. And this is the point about Ephialtes, that there are women. Part of the sexual spoils are that there are women that even he can have. Even the sort of that's the suggestion by the book. I'm not saying this is an issue. I'm saying that's an issue for Miller, who proposes this disabled person as a freak, a monster, who so he gets to have these dreamlike women. The other kind of women are the mothers, and those whose chief role is to produce the next generation of warriors, to produce sons. And this is something we're going to see directly in Sherry Tepper's book, The Gate to Women's Country. Leonidas' wife notes before she tells him famously to come home with his shield or on it. And this is a very much quoted phrase, and it's apparently true. What we have no idea what that really means. It means that somebody came up with this phrase, which is probably was a standard sort of stock phrase that people said. Not a very nice thing to say to you, but it's very pragmatic. That is, don't dishonor us in war. The problem with being dishonored is that you might be frozen out of the community, the village community, or the small community that you're in. So being seen to be honorable in war, especially in a war-making culture like Sparta, is really important. Okay, so there's some reality behind the bring home, come home with your what did he say? She says, come home with your shield or on it, right? And that Leonidas has been enthusiastic in bed the night before. This is on page 22, and he says only Sparta needs sons. And okay, so this is again sort of the picture of the whole culture which is aimed at war making. Well, why the Spartans? What is there about this military that keeps us so attracted and so mesmerized? And there are probably two discernible things that we can jump on right away. One is that if you haven't faced death and learned some ultimate truth about yourself, or had some kind of test in that confrontation, you probably haven't learned whether you're a courageous human being or not. This is the way the thinking goes. You're not one of the initiated, you're not a warrior, nor are you truly a citizen. And there's still a lot of argument about this, where people will say, if you didn't lay down your life for your country, you don't deserve to be a citizen. And if you're, how are you going to? The other part of this is, if you haven't, how are you going to prove you're a man? Essentially, well, the best sure way to prove you're a man is to go and kill another man. That's the argument. If you're a woman and you prove yourself in war, you still have to go home and have children, because for a woman, that's the job, that's the task, basically. So this is the first thing, is this belief that personhood is created in war, and only war can really do this job so well and so efficiently. I mean, it really does the job, boom, in one shot. The second thing that we've learned about our love affair with war in the military is that if you haven't joined in, you are weak. And this issue is incredibly powerful, because if you're weak, then there are all these other things that go along with it. suggestion of cowardice, just not having authority, just not having the, and you can see very much the way that the American the press and also the people look at the military, and they expect these generals, like everybody expected the generals in, say, the 4 years of Trump's presidency to essentially sit Trump down like a little boy and explain the world to him. And they tried. I mean, Mattis, there were the number of, there 3 or 4 generals went through the White House, and each one of them tried to educate Trump. And he was like, yeah, get out of here. Like, you're just a military guy. I mean, despite all this stuff about, he loves the military. He loves the military as long as basically they're loyal to him. But actually the military is not loyal to the president. They are commanded by the office. That's it's a different thing. Anyway, but it's a military culture. The Spartans based their understanding of the world on a branch of philosophy started by Parmenides, who was a pre-Socratic thinker, roughly around the same time, 500 or so BCE, who also worked alongside of other philosophers like Zeno. There were a huge number of pre-Socratic, Socratic, and post-Socratic philosophers, basically, in Greece. And you'll be familiar with Zeno's paradox, sometimes called Achilles' paradox. And Achilles' paradox, or Zeno's paradox, works sort of like this. Normally we're in a classroom for this. I need something I can... Okay. I'm going to take one of my socks here, and I'm going to make it into a ball. All right. Okay. Keep your eyes peeled. Okay, I'm okay, now you're going to see this sock fly over and hit the bookcase. Okay, here we go. Long. Okay, did you see that? I hope you saw that. I wonder if it came out too high. Oh, maybe it came out too high. Let's do that again. I'll aim lower. Okay, here we go. Watch for the sock. Here comes the sock. Okay. Whoops. Okay. All right, it's always good. Okay, so Zeno's paradox says, what just happened? And at this point, I would ask the class, what just happened? And somebody would say, it's like, this is a trick question, right, Tim? I'm like, no, it's not a trick question. It's a proof, right? What just happened? And somebody will say, after a long pause, all right, the sock hit the bookcase. And I would say, that's true, right? But for Zeno, what happened is that mathematically, because these guys are mathematicians and they believe the way Plato did, that mathematics undergirded reality, which to some extent is, well, it's true. I mean, mathematics is a language which we can use, like physics, to describe the physical realities around us more accurately and represent. It's a symbolic language which we use to represent what's happening around us. Okay, fine. So, because he was a mathematician, Zeno said, okay, look, here's the bookcase, and here comes the sock. Now, we know, because of math, that the sock has to arrive halfway to the bookcase, and then it has to go half the distance of the halfway, and then it has to go half of that distance, and half that distance again, and half that distance, and half that distance, and half the next distance, and half the next, until it never arrives, right? Because there's an infinite number of halves of distances. So it's going to get closer to the bookcase, but it will never actually arrive at the bookcase because mathematically it can't. It always has to go half the distance. So the reason that Achilles, it's called Achilles' paradox because Achilles is the fastest runner because he's part god. He's the fastest human runner. The reason that the Achilles can't ever reach the finish line is that he has to go half the distance and half and half and half and half and half. And so he never reaches the finish line. And so this is going to sound goofy, right? People are like, wow, whatever. So what? But the point about this is that the outcome is that the takeaway with this and many other kinds of observation was that your senses are lying to you. Specifically your vision, but all your senses. So you can't trust your eyes because your eyes saw something happen, and then in fact there was a cause and effect. Like I threw the sock, it hit the bookcase, it knocked off one of my cards that I have up, and so on. So there was cause and effect. As far as Zeno is concerned, all that stuff is unimportant. It's all just junk. Your senses are just lying to you. That your hearing is lying to you. Your eyes are lying to you. Your sense of smell, it's all just lies. None of that is reality. What's reality is mathematics, right? If that's true and your senses are lying to you, then why do we pay so much attention to our senses? Well, the Spartans and Laconians and a number of other similar people who followed these forms of philosophy, Stoics basically, said, yeah, our senses are lying to us. So we're going to set them aside. And they worked hard at separating the senses and saying that's a lie, which means they weren't affected by the weather because they went out in the cold and they went out in sandals and they went out in their wool cloaks with their breech clout on, which basically would have been a wrapping, or not. And they didn't feel the cold. They walked across beds of coals. They trained brutally. They were trained to take all kinds of hits and physical damage and not feel it, because they shut off their sensory apparatus. This is what they trained at for years as children. And if you can get a child and you train the child right away to stop paying attention to all the things, being too hot and too cold, and the mosquitoes are bothering you, and all these. So right now I'm itchy, and then you can stop all that. If you can stop all that and truly divorce the individual from the body, which is the idea of the Stoic idea, then that's why we use the word Stoic, right? Because we'll say somebody, oh, they're very Stoic, which means that they can suffer all kinds of pain, which we know they're having because we can see it in the body, but they don't complain. Why not? Because they're not paying attention to the evidence of their senses. They're saying, no, that's junk information, right? So these teachings will reappear in 300 BCE, about a couple hundred years later, as Stoicism, a branch of philosophy taught by another Zeno. And effectively, this is the beginning of the mind-body split, which we are still living with today.